Hi, this is Victoria Meyer. Welcome back to the Chemical Show, where chemicals means business. Today, I am at HCPA, the Household and Consumer Products Association, and I am speaking with Greg Adamson, who is the Senior VP of Government Affairs, Product Stewardship, and Sustainability at Givaudan. And we're going to just be talking about Givaudan, we're going to talk about Greg, and we're going to talk about their role here at HCPA. Thanks for joining me today.
It's a pleasure.
So tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got into this world of regulations and product stewardship and more.
You know, I'd like to tell you that it was a conscious choice from when I was a baby, but I'd be lying. So a little bit about me. By training, I'm a toxicologist, so I'm trained in the art of the science of poisons and preventing adverse effects of drugs, chemicals, and other things.
Yeah.
Started out in Australia working and training, and somebody said to me I should come to the United States to get some experience on the industrial side. So I came over here and I started in the biotech industry in San Francisco with Genentech, but it was a short-term contract. And things were going well. Things didn't seem to be quite as interesting back in my homeland, and I went to P&G. They picked me up, worked for them for 10 years in varying degrees of different roles, and at that point was starting to get into more regulatory, but a lot of toxicology. And I realized that I wanted to broaden my horizons because what I do in toxicology underlies all of the regulatory things that we have to maintain.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a good build, and at that point Avon Products asked me to run their regulatory and product safety globally for their R&D organization.
Awesome.
So I moved to the East Coast, which is where I'd been, and then finally I moved to Givaudan and spent 3 years in Europe with them, and then came back as the global head of regulatory and product safety here.
Awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about Givaudan, because people may not be fully familiar.
Yes, so Givaudan has two main product areas. We make flavors and taste solutions for all types of foods, beverages, snacks, and then we have a fragrance division which designs all of the fragrances that you might like. We like to say that you've probably experienced us 29 times today already and you didn't know it, because we make all the fragrances that go into those iconic products that everybody loves. So you think of fine fragrances like J'adore and Chanel No. 5, but that's actually only a small part of what we do. We make fragrances that go into the detergents, the cleaners, the air care products that make the home smell nice, hygienic, the cleaning products, those types of things. And then we also make cosmetic ingredients. So, and we're based out of Geneva, global company. We're nudging almost 8 billion now Swiss francs.
Nice.
So it's been a pretty fun ride, and I've been there for 18 odd years.
Yeah, that's wild. And actually, almost 8 billion Swiss francs, I guess, is where you're at. On products that are probably tiny in the final finished product.
Yes.
Is that true?
Yes. One of the things that people don't understand, when you can taste something or smell something, you think that there's a lot of it.
Yeah.
In the food. So a classic story is we make the chicken flavor for chicken noodle soup. We've done that for many, many years. I think there was actually a 60 Minutes story about it. But the amount of flavor in the chicken noodle soup is microscopic compared to the rest of, so it's maybe 0.1% or less in the chicken noodle soup. And it's the same for fragrance, because the materials we use are extremely strong, and so we don't need much of them to give that benefit.
Interesting. So then what is your tie to HCPA?
So why have we been at HCPA? In fact, Givaudan around the world is member of trade associations all over the world, because we need to be involved in the evolution of regulations and managing the changes that we see that are constantly striving to make sure our industry is safe and effective.
Yeah.
So we have two missions. One is to be a good industrial steward, to make sure that we continue to make our industry, as well as ourselves, a strong citizen of the industry, to make sure products are safe, to help the industry maintain that reputation. So HCPA is one vehicle to do that, but importantly, it's also a vehicle to help us with the rest of the industry when we need to, I would say, influence in a positive direction things that are happening to make sure we have viable industry going forward.
Got it. Makes sense. And so when you think about HCPA, and I've been having conversations and have been, sitting in some of the sessions and having conversations, which will be going out on the Chemical Show.
Yeah.
What are the priorities that are critical to Givaudan?
The priorities for us, I think, specifically for HCPA, really trying to get the EPA and new chemicals into a better shape. It really is at a point where we see that there is an inhibition of innovation that's resulted from a very, I would say, poorly operating regulatory area.
Yeah.
And we've been trying to work with the EPA on reforms to help make that more productive.
Yeah.
So that is one priority, and it's a long-range priority. In the fragrance area, we have a specific discussion with the EPA about that as well. So that's one key priority. But I would say the bigger priority is overall product stewardship of chemicals. And we see, because of what has happened over many years, there's gridlock in DC.
Yeah.
Part of why we see this change of administration now, but we see a big increase in state-based legislation and activity, which is not helpful because it's a patchwork quilt of different things, making it very complex for industry to manage, very difficult to administer, and overall raises the cost of doing business. So that's our other priority, is really to help try and strive for national standardized regulations to enable states to feel comfortable and not have to do their own thing.
Yeah, and I think that's important. And I think about Givaudan as a global company, you're navigating a lot of global regulations. So there is a certain ease if we had just a single regulation across the U.S. And I know we're doing a lot of things, as you've already pointed out, patchwork and state by state.
Yeah.
But how does Givaudan think about this globally?
So at a global level, I would say what we see is that there is a tendency to be moving to the most restrictive standard. Yeah. Europe has been on a long-running, very sort of sustainable platform called the Green Deal for chemicals, which is not necessarily the way it's being executed. And we see that migrating into regulators and legislators' offices here in the U.S., because if people view it as a gold standard, then why not bring it here? Same in other countries. Other countries are also setting up their own policies. What we would like to see is commonality across the globe. We recognize there's a need for control and good regulation, but having everything done differently is tremendously complicated. And today it's a very complex world, so we're in each of the countries that we operate in, doing the same thing, trying to make sure legislators understand what's really needed, showing that industry is under good control, not getting disproportionate regulation, and trying to make it as uniform as we can around the world.
Right. And obviously that uniformity creates more reliability, creates simplicity. It becomes easier to produce the right products.
Yes. Yeah.
And it also simplifies business in many ways.
Exactly.
So that may be a bit of nirvana, because I think a lot of people are hoping for that, but the which standard to follow is a tricky one.
That's right. And if it weren't that, you probably wouldn't be talking to me, because companies wouldn't need to manage the complexity with people who are doing what I do.
Yeah.
And
so there's a bit of job security involved.
Could be.
So you talked about the microscopic quantities of your products that go into final formulations. And what strikes me with this is navigating this is a challenge, right? Because often, and this is a conversation I've had throughout the years, the recognition of hazard versus risk is not well understood. The impacts of Givaudan's products at these microscopic levels are not the same as it would be if they were going in much larger quantities. How do you navigate through that? Yeah.
So I think for me there's two parts. One is education. And the second one is demonstrating the safe use. Particularly in the fragrance space, but also in the taste and flavor space. Most of the materials that we use and produce are coming from nature. So we will find those natural materials in foods, in plants, and we will copy them so we can mass produce them for the use in fragrance and flavor without destroying crops, native heritage, and so on. So educating regulators, educating stakeholders in understanding, first of all, what we're doing, which is quite unique in the chemical space, is a lot of these materials are in your everyday lives without us. If you like smelling plants, if you have pot plants, if you have a garden, if you like flowers, you're already getting exposed. If you're eating fruits and vegetables, you're already getting exposed. So educating people that, in fact, we're not doing much different to what they already have. Then it comes down to how is it being used and what data do we have. And as you say, we use very low levels. And those tiny levels present no risk for consumers in the way they're intended to be used in the products that they're being used. However, when it comes to hazard versus risk, hazard means that you define that something could be toxic at some level, but you never talk about how it's being used or at what level. It's simply, well, it's toxic. It's a little bit like the lion could eat you. But what's the chance of the lion eating you if there is no lion in the room, or if the lion is in the room but it's in a cage?
Right.
There is no chance of being injured by the lion. So you've got to get the practical understanding of how the product's being used, not just, oh, well, it could eat you.
Right.
That's the difference. And I think helping regulators and stakeholders understand that as toxicologists, which is my, and there's thousands of people like me who dedicate their lives to that science, that's the goal, is to make sure we are not killing our consumers. There's no benefit to killing a consumer because they won't buy more of our product. So you want to make sure they're healthy and happy and using chemicals in the right way. Yes, in the past, certainly we've developed science and things have evolved, but today I would say we're very sophisticated, very capable to do that, but we have to educate people to show them we really have a good foundation.
Makes sense. Well, one of the analogies I use with people when they start talking about hazards, I'm like, water is hazardous. And yet we need to consume water. We can bathe in water safely. We can go swimming in water, and yet you can also drown in water, right? So understanding the appropriate use, the safeguards around that becomes really critical.
Exactly.
Let's talk about leadership. You work with a lot of great leaders. You yourself have achieved a great level of leadership in your career. What do you find to be critical? If somebody was going to replicate your success, what advice do you have?
So I would say the biggest thing about leadership for me is leadership is not a job, it's a lifestyle. Leadership is about a passionate engagement that is authentic and that you spend a lot of time with your organization and people to understand what they need, understand also where the organization and the business is going, and that you are able to, from a visionary perspective, take them on a journey that is hopefully aligned with the organization, but doing it in a way that's very supportive. In our area of regulatory affairs, often we can be perceived as a brake or a policeman, kind of the old analogy of regulatory affairs. Today we're an enabler. And we're a partner to the business to help them navigate into new product areas, open up new markets, put product and licenses to give access to markets. So we're very, very strategically aligned with the business. And for those companies that use regulatory affairs in that way will be very successful in the future. So, I think that's where it's, it takes strong leadership, which is about communicating. It's about relating to the environment you're in, learning not to just be a toxicologist, but learning to be a businessman, learning to be a salesman, learning to be a marketer, talking in that language, helping people understand and translate what we do into something that's of value to them.
Yeah, makes sense. That's great. Well, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. And thanks everyone for joining us today on The Chemical Show. Keep listening, keep following, keep sharing, and we will talk with you again soon.